official debate happening. We have Mickael, we have Jacob. For this debate, Mickael's taken the position that the lockdown that has been implemented is a geopolitical action, and SARS-CoV2 was nothing more than an excuse to do so. Jacob's taken the opposition. As always, when we base upon who concedes, we don't get a vocal concession from either participant. We put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can decide on who you think performed better in the debate. No time limit, no moderation. You guys can get started.
All right. Do you want to get started, or should I?
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, I am but a pawn of the media's mass manipulation. I've bought into the narrative, one of the sheep. So, by all means, please wake us up to the truth behind COVID. And yeah, I mean, I'll just be here to maybe ask some questions, try to see if your version of events is coherent, and yeah, we'll see where we get. So yeah, I'm excited for you to make your case. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that sounds fair. All right. So first of all, how I'm gonna go about this question is that first, it's all about how dangerous the virus is, and I don't believe it to be much more problematic than a simple common flu, despite not having any medication for it. And from there, I'm going to try and prove that we already were able to see that according to statistics in March. And that will be the tricky part. And that's maybe the weakest part of my argument will be to actually infer if it was due to incompetency or if it was due to dishonesty. And so first of all, let's start on the dangerosity of the virus. So first of all, before we get to what we knew in March, about what we know right now, there is two aspects to the danger of the virus. First of all, its ability to spread. And second of all, what we call the infection fatality rate, meaning once you're infected, depending on your comorbidity and your age, how likely you are to die. And then we can add to that some stuff like life expectancy reduction. Some viruses, for example, have much higher life expectancy reduction. That's due just to the difference in IFR, so infection fatality rates between different ages. And yeah, there is also there is not just the death, there is also the long-term damage. But as we will see later, I do not believe that the rate of long-term damage is especially high compared with the rate of death itself. So let's start with the spread first. People have told us a lot of things about how extremely fast this virus spread. In order to get the spread, usually we express it in RO or R0. And this is basically how many people, in average, one people will spread the virus to. It is right now around 2.5 in average, according to studies. It's been the case since the beginning, but which is slightly higher than influenza, even though it's much lower than tuberculosis or measles or many diseases we used to have but do not have now thanks to vaccine. But it is still... Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Comment there?
Yeah, sure.
So it seems like, though, when we're talking about lockdown measures, that these are one of the most influential factors in determining that R0 number, the amount of people one person infects. So the policies that I'm familiar with look at this number very carefully in determining how to close down or open up the economy, so that when one person is infecting more than one person, so the virus by that very nature is going to grow rather than shrink, that would be then the guide to close down phases of the economy, to not have concerts, not have large gatherings of people, to encourage wearing masks, etc. So when that number begins to go up, you look at increasing these lockdown measures, and then when that number drops, you look at opening things up. So one of the things we did here in Ontario, in Canada, is that we had a very high, like a relatively high number at first in sort of March into May, And then, we did the sort of strict lockdown, and we watched, and you can, I have some graphs we can look at later, but that show, a very steady drop as this RO number, R0 number goes down. The lockdowns are very, very important to keep people from spreading it to more than one person or, multiple people, right? And then as we saw the success of that, we then began to open things up. And now we're seeing with that, now that we're opening things up, again, the numbers begin to spike and that R0 number to go up.
So
I think
I would like to make a precision. Okay, please go ahead. Sorry, I thought you were finished.
Oh, just one final sentence, sort of like cap it down. So the point is, it's important to look at the overall number, sure, like the 2.5 or whatever you said, but also we need to look at like specifically how that number changes in relation to the environment that we present it with.
I perfectly agree. The infection is, of course, impacted by human activities. And that's why I said the average R0. Usually we call it RT, but people don't understand RT, while the media often talks about the R0. That's why I said the average R0. And yes, it does depend on the country, but as I was going to continue, I do not believe this to be extremely important, because I would rather just look at the results, meaning that now we have serological tests. Serological tests are the antibody tests. So the tests that can know not only if you are infected right now, but if you were infected at any point in your past, at least in the couple previous months. And what I wanted to do is just look at the percentage of a population getting infected in different places, notably places that locked down, places that didn't lock down, like Sweden, for example, and compare it with comparable factors. For example, you can take the capital from Sweden that has a density, I could check it out. It doesn't have a very high density, and it had around 8% of infections. For example, you can easily compare that with other cities in order to know what's happening when it comes to the spread. But,
sure, but
when I made the point about
Sweden did worse than its neighbors, though, when it came to COVID, though, that its policy of not locking down, while not being, out and out disaster, one could say, certainly was, it led to higher rates of COVID infection.
I think it isn't fair to say that, because Norwegia and Finland had amongst the best lockdown in the world, meaning that if you look, for example, at other diseases, other infectious diseases, they had a drop in like never before, meaning they had less deaths than in any previous year in 2020 during this period. If you compare with the average deaths of previous year during the same period, they had way much less deaths overall. They had way much less infections from other diseases, way much less infections from COVID. They had an extremely successful lockdown. Now you can take from the USA to Spain, Germany, France, UK, Italy, take your pick. All of them had much higher deaths than in previous years, had much higher infection from every single type of disease. It's, I think, dishonest to compare it with Finland and Norway, because Finland and Norway are amongst the very few countries that had successful lockdowns.
See, because I would say that,
yes,
this would point directly to, the importance of a lockdown. And this sort of like, I know there's probably plenty of statistics and news we could point to, but, just one thing I could gesture at is that as Europe is reopening, I've got this article that basically says that much of Europe is reopening, but none of Sweden's neighbors have relaxed their border with it after its decision to have no COVID-19 lockdown. So as Denmark,
but it is political,
Finland,
because
and Norway,
if you look at, please finish. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, yeah, my bad. Just to say quickly that, these other countries around it have now kept their border closed to it, while opening their borders to others, sort of leading to Sweden's isolation and probably like economic consequences for Sweden. So, I think we do see the results of their policies.
I would like to go back at some point to the general point of the virus itself, but
Sure,
if you want to talk
sure.
about
But
this
just one
specific
more stat.
fact, I would
So
like to
just one
just
more
real quick.
stat about Sweden.
Yeah, but that wasn't a stat. That was just about what the politician said. And let me just show you the actual stats about Sweden. And Sweden is completely over. So any politician who wants to keep the border closed with Sweden didn't look at the stats. And I'm sending you the graph of deaths right now. And we can look at other graph as well if you wish. Let me get you the graph of infection. It's going to look the same.
Yeah, I'd love to. Because we see that
yeah.
in early June that Sweden had one of the highest COVID-19 death tolls in the world, proportionate to its population, 4,874 deaths reported.
Let me just show you. Yeah, but you just told me that up until today, people are delaying opening their border to Sweden because
I wouldn't
didn't.
say up until today. I would just say that. So that article was from.
Yeah, when was the date?
So that this is an older article. This is from the middle of June about how Sweden was not opening their border. But I have, I mean, we have these articles of as of early June, how Sweden was doing relative to their COVID.
Yeah, but
so I mean, it's not like current, but I mean it does describe how this went for them, and their articles at the time that it was happening. So it's not like.
But you see, this is a very good example of something that that you should be wary about. Is that if you look at the two curve I just sent you, what problem do you see? What is illogical about those two curves? Do you see anything illogical on the two curves I just sent?
Sure. Well, we have on the first one, the deaths is going, steadily down. There's pretty much no bumps, and also there's the most deaths are right at the beginning, whereas the cases doesn't go in alignment to that. We see that,
exactly.
Cases actually spike later.
Yeah, exactly. The cases don't lead to a spike in deaths, or don't the spike in cases didn't even lead to a change in deaths. Actually, it didn't not even a spike, but it didn't even make them go up.
Sure, but we can understand why that would be, right? Because as resources have been allocated to this global pandemic, they now have a lot more of the necessary resources, which will result in fewer deaths, sort of on hand, ready to go.
But Sweden never.
Is that when you have things spiking, if you don't take any lockdown measures, right, or if you have things spiking, then there will be a tendency to have these resources all consumed, so that once a hospital runs out of ventilators, then you're going to see a massive spike in death, right? And if you have then an uncontrolled spread where a pandemic is running away, then things are going to get very bad very quickly. So while we have sort of a marshaling of resources that is going to remove this death from danger, the danger of death, because there are so many resources that have been devoted to it, this isn't something we can keep up. And it's also, it's, as you said, it's negatively impacted other health outcomes. So that if you have a flu that gets really bad, you're probably not going to go to the hospital. If you break your toe, you might be like, oh, maybe I'll just walk it off and it'll be fine, right? Because you don't want to go to the hospital. So there are all these other problems that then come about as a result of these medical resources getting hogged up.
There's only one small problem with that, is that hospitals and ventilators were never lacking in Sweden, nor were they in the USA, for example. Actually, 2 years ago, you had a lack of resources during the winter, during the flu. You had just for the flu in America, 810,000 people hospitalized just for the flu. And you know that also all other diseases tends to hit in the winter, and it was all together. Right now with COVID, like in America, you have, and that was just within 22 weeks, by the way, just the 22 weeks winter 2 years ago, just in the USA. Right now in the USA
So I
for
don't
COVID,
think
you had like 500,000 hospitalization, and it was
so. As it is now,
and they have
COVID is
yeah.
the number 3 cause of death after like cancer and heart disease in America. So it is certainly worse than the common flu, right? And this is not just a problem that's going to go away necessarily if it's not addressed, but you do need to take measures to combat it,
But
right?
the deaths weren't accounted using the same type of definition and recommendation. They were accounted using the pandemic definition and recommendation, because here's the issue. What is the definition of a pandemic? It has to be worldwide, and it has to be a new virus. And that's very important, because if it's a new virus, so you don't know how it acts on the body, how can you say that he died because of this virus, not because of a comorbidity? Let's say you have the flu and you have cancer. If you got a pneumonia or if you got a lung infection and you die, people are going to say he died from his cancer with the help of the flu. And you will count as both a cancer death and a flu death. That's how it works. Now, if you have
But
COVID and you have
likewise, if you
cancer,
get AIDS, right? Likewise, if you
yeah,
have
no,
AIDS,
I mean, this is, yeah, of course, that's how we do it for everything. Now, when it comes to actually COVID, it's falls under pandemic recommendation and pandemic definition. And that means that we're not going to say that if you don't have a lung infection, if you are asymptomatic, if you don't cough, if you don't have a fever, then COVID didn't kill you, because we don't know how COVID might kill you. We don't know how COVID works. So we work with very, very much looser definition that basically makes every single people who has COVID count as a COVID death if they die of a comorbidity, even if they have no symptom, even if they don't have pneumonia, don't have lung infection. And that is a very good thing, by the way. Like, this is why they had data to work with, and they discovered that blood clog and circulatory problems were a leading cause of death in people from COVID. And now we use blood thinner in the ICU, and that saved countless lives. And we've always done that. You can look at the WHO Article 10 from 10 to 12. And that's precisely about that. That's about when you got a new virus, a pandemic, even if someone don't get tested, if he has the symptoms and if he might have been in contact with someone who had the disease, please count it as if he had the disease, because we want to be as loose as possible in order to predict things and in order to see unexpected patterns. And the same goes for people getting tested who can die from completely other disease, but still count as a COVID death. So don't take death.
So I would extend an olive branch insofar as, like, I don't think that it is easy to pinpoint these things all the time, right? It's a new thing. We might get these things wrong a fraction of the time, a proportion of the time. But the fact that we're getting better at treating COVID is a sign that COVID is in fact like a real thing that one can get better at treating, that you do need to like administer blood thinners to deal with the effects, because it's actually, more than just like a lung thing. We've now learned that, it affects the blood, right, too, and it increases massively your risk of stroke, increases your risk of other heart disease. It presents like very strangely in children, and it seems to affect the blood in general, both in the lungs as So this is, while we don't know everything, we know it is a coronavirus. We have been studying other coronaviruses. And this is a real threat. So, the debate should be sort of larger than just about this one topic. So I want to get to, your other beliefs about COVID, such that it is a geopolitical conspiracy somehow.
But everything stems from that, because in March, I just went ahead and did everything I needed to do to know how dangerous it is. And I saw that it wasn't more dangerous than the damned flu. And then now it is confirmed. By the way, I can send you studies that shows that it is.
Right. But you would agree it's like, it does seem to be real, right? It is real.
I never said it wasn't a real virus. Like, that's
okay.
not part
so you
of
agree
the.
It's a real virus, and you agree
of
that.
Course.
But you do agree it's worse than just the flu, right? Because,
no, I do not.
Flus are like a bunch of different viruses, kind of referring to a bunch of them all together, and that like, even taking them all together, and we have like immunities for them. We've developed flu shots. We have and so these are one class of thing, and this other thing is a new virus that is rapidly spreading in certain places. If it got to the point of spreading and being everywhere all the time, if we didn't take certain precautions, then it would actually probably be much, much worse than the flu. So looking at these, and right, because it requires, with the flu, there is a very small chance maybe you get put on a ventilator, but it is not anywhere the same amount, right? And this has lasting damage, right? Damage to your
so excuse me,
lungs,
but
damage to your heart,
you're making a lot of.
stroke.
Please don't Gillish galloping. Yeah, please, because you made so many points in a row. So first of all, we haven't even finished on hospitalization yet. Like the number of hospitalization is much lower than for the flu. And so there hasn't been a lack of ventilator or of hospital bed, neither in Sweden or the USA. And we can look into the numbers if you want to confirm that. And the issue is that when we were talking of that, you switched to the deaths, and then I had to argue about the deaths. And now you made even many more arguments. And you started with the fact that the flu is comprised of many strains. And I mean, it doesn't really matter. Even if just one strain of COVID is not much more deadly than all strain of flu, we can still say it's not worse than the flu, right? It's not worse than just those what we usually call the flu that happens every winter. Surely the number of hospitalization is much less. And by the way, coming back to the deaths, the fact that we have a virus that is supposed to spread more, yet hospitalize less people, yet kills more people is illogical. You cannot have a virus that spreads more, hospitalize twice less people, but kills 4 times more people. Because the flu, for example, it was 61,000 2 years ago, but here now COVID is 180. Yet for hospitalization, as I told you, it was almost twice lower. And
but that number 180 is way higher than the flu, right? That was a much higher number.
Yeah, but as I told you, this is due to the different definition, and I sent you an article that basically goes over. But if you want to know the exact definition for each state or each country, you can go on the Ministry of Health website, and they are very clear about it. If you want to know the recommendation for the countries given by the WHO, you can look on the article 10 to 12 on the WHO, and it will give you everything. And
Sure. I'm not I'm not a doctor, right? I'm not an expert on, the exact nature of what.
And as I told you, this actually increased by 75. I think it's inflated by around 75% just on this basis. There have been studies by the Ministry of Health in Italy that considers 88% of all their deaths weren't due to COVID or weren't accelerated by COVID, and was completely the fault of comorbidities. 88% in Italy. And so why would Italy have a much less deadlier virus than America? I do believe that this inflates the numbers by around 75%. And it's actually like quite logical, because as you can imagine, 94% of comorbidities and increased life expectancy compared with the usual life expectancy is not usual, even for things like the flu. That's not really usual. And also, you can see that life expectancy in the people in America who died without any comorbidity is actually high. Like, so if you don't have any comorbidity and you die from the virus, you see that your life expectancy is actually lowered by a lot. But if you look at the group with comorbidity, you see that statistically it increases your life expectancy to get COVID. And this clearly shows you that there's a problem with the statistics. And the problem is evident. It's just that it's not a problem, it's just a definition used. It's actually a good thing, but it makes the number of deaths not a reliable number to look at. And this is also shown, for example, I mean, that's pretty much it, because as I told you, it's impossible to have a deadlier disease that spread more but makes a lot less hospitalization. And hospitalization, which are sure the definition is correct.
So I'm very dubious to trust like a study that's using life expectancy, right? Studies of like based on people who have COVID, because like clearly they have to
The
reach
study in
their
Italy
natural life
was a
expectancy.
randomized
Yeah.
coroner study. Yeah, but in Italy, the study was a randomized coroner study. So they took randomly bodies dead from coronavirus that were counted as coronavirus deaths. They picked
So
them randomly, and they
so
made
how would
coroner
you
study on
study
them
that?
to see. Well,
How would you
like
study
those.
life expectancy of people who have COVID though? Like they haven't had a chance to live out their life, right? 'Cause
Oh well,
coronavirus is just a year old.
it's pretty easy. There are many websites where you can, like we've calculated for every type of comorbidity, and when comorbidity interact with each other, the expected life expectancy. So, for example, the general life expectancy is usually around 80
Oh,
years
so it's
old
like
in first world
purely
countries.
projected. So how would
Yes,
we
exactly.
project? How would
Well,
we
what we do is that
project COVID?
we take an average of the age at which they died from COVID, from the people we know they had COVID and died. And it's very easy. You had COVID, you died. Okay, we take all of those people, we average their age, and then we average their comorbidities, and then we run that compared to the already existing model we have in order to calculate life expectancy without
So
accounting
that's
for
not
COVID, and
saying
we
what.
compare the two numbers.
So, but that's just saying like what age people had when they were when they died of COVID. That's not going to say what your life expectancy will be after you've had COVID.
No, but
trying
we
to
compare
survive.
that with. Yeah, but here's the thing. Like, let's say that in
How that will affect your life
10,000.
going forward.
Yeah, but let's just say like we have 10,000 people, and you know that if a third of them have diabetes, a third of them are obese or whatever, you know, their comorbidity. We know from the past the expected life expectancy for this group. We already know that. It's not always real, but you already know the statistical. Just like life expectancy, we say we have a life expectancy of 80 years old. That doesn't mean you're going to die at 80 years old, right?
Sure.
Like
Yeah,
if you say that in the state of Texas they have a 2-year less life expectancy than in the state of, like, we know it by exactly the same way. We look at how old people are when they die.
Sure.
And,
So I would
and when we
agree that COVID might, I mean, it certainly does target people who have like comorbidities, who are older, who, but I don't think that means that it's any less real, or that the government shouldn't take efforts to protect those people, and that, the spread among the healthy people, maybe who won't even be affected, maybe they won't even feel it, maybe they'll get a cough, maybe not. The spread amongst those people is actually, when controlling that, is going to be vital in protecting, the vulnerable members of our society, our parents, our grandparents, our, the sick and, compromised people.
But you understand we have a big issue, like because we didn't finish the analysis of the spread, but if you have something which is kind of seasonal, just like the influenza that comes and goes depending on the month, depending on the region, and if that thing usually infects less than 10% of the population, sometimes more, sometimes less, and if that thing hospitalized much less people than the flu, and then we could get to that, it actually kills most likely less people than the flu, then we have an issue. And as I told you, like, you stayed stuck on the life expectancy, but you completely ignored the coroner studies in Italy that ended up with 88% of them not actually dying from or because of the virus. And I mean, like, they didn't release the study publicly, but I can release you the head of the research for the Ministry of Health of Italy, who conducted the study and gave the conclusion.
Even if it is sort of like 1 in 2% of fatality rate, something like that, if we go for a herd immunity, let's say the States does, for example, because currently Trump is being advised on policy to do that. So this is an issue that's on the table now. If you go to herd immunity, that means that between like about 67% of people in the United States will have to get it. And if about 67% of people get it, and about 1.5 people, not even 2%, but like 1.5 people die, then that means that about like 1.75 million people are going to die.
But that's a complete fallacy. There is so many fallacies in that. First of all, you're only considering the number of infection based on the number of tests, not the number of serological tests. Sometimes the number of tests downplays the number of infection by up to 50 times, by 5,000%. So that's the first issue. So your conclusion on, well, okay, let me ask you that. If you get COVID in average, what's the percentage of chance you have to die? And by the way, philosophically, I saw your comments, and yes, we can go back to long-term damage afterwards. But as you will see, any disease that might kill you might not kill you, but leave you long-term damage. Anything that can kill you can do that. But we can go back to the rate of long-term damage.
So my research is between 1.5% and 3%.
Okay, so do you realize that the CDC thinks you are wrong, the WHO thinks you are wrong, every single study out thinks you are wrong, and my study, obviously, which are even like lower than that, thinks you are wrong.
Okay, so what?
The CDC is at the CDC is at 0.26%. The WHO is at 0.6%, and I'm on around 0.06%. And we can go over studies if you need. I'm on 0.06.
Okay, but even if it's
very low.
0.6%, that's still
no. 0.6 is the WHO.
Like
the CDC is 0.26, and I'm on 0.06. And also, the other fallacy is that herd immunity is a myth. Like it would take multiple years to have. Yeah, that's my own prediction is 0.06. The CDC is 0.26. The WHO is 0.6, and the average on the different studies published is 0.17. And I can link it to you if you require.
Sure, but on what basis are you saying that it's 0.06? That's your own thing?
First of all, on my own calculus, and second of all, on the fact that the methodology and the institution.
So is this the number by? So is this the number by? Like you have it, you're going to get it, because this is going to differ largely by countries, right?
Yeah, it differs by country, of course. Countries,
Belgium
of course,
has like a case fatality rate of 11%.
No, you're looking at the CFR. I'm talking of the IFR. Like the WHO will explain it to you much better than I will. If you go on their website, they clearly say that the CFR is useless. If you look in 2009, we had a pandemic in 2009, right?
I mean, not to this level, certainly.
Well, we did have a pandemic. Like a pandemic doesn't need to be dangerous, as I said. The definition of a pandemic is that it spreads fast worldwide, and it's.
We probably had an epidemic. I don't know.
No, it was a pandemic. No, the definition of a pandemic is not that it's dangerous. It's just that it spreads worldwide and it spreads fast. It doesn't need to kill many people. Like it could kill 20 people. It's still a pandemic. It needs to be a new virus. Like influenza is a pandemic. The only reason influenza is not a pandemic is because it's not a new virus.
So case fatality rate here, like the US is 3%. That's very good, but that's still higher than 0.06 or 0.006.
Yeah, but this is what
you said.
There is a case fatality rate, and there is two things: the case fatality rate and the. Okay, so there is two things: the case fatality rate and the infection fatality rate. The difference is that the case fatality rate is just for the case that we found out with test while they were infected. And the infection fatality rate, we infer how many people were infected. And this is why infection fatality rates, the best ones, are made based on serological tests. Because, for example, we know how many people got infected in Texas, but we know how many people died in Texas pretty accurately. But we don't know how many people got infected accurately because we don't have enough tests for that, because many asymptomatic people do not even go and get tested. And so when you do serological tests, then you can infer how many of them got infected, and then you can know the real infection fatality rate. And this is extremely important when you do not randomize test. If you look at Iceland, they made a randomized study, and this is what we usually do for other disease. And then you see that the case fatality rate and the infection fatality rates are similar.
Well, Iceland is an island, and it's known for having like almost no cases, or very few cases. So, the fact that it showed
but it doesn't matter.
No cases in Iceland. No, but the fact that you're citing Iceland as
the number of cases doesn't matter. No, but when we talk about how many people die compared to how many people got infected, it doesn't matter if they don't have a lot of infected. Yeah, Iceland.
It's Iceland. So I can't take any study from Iceland to be indicative because they had like an incredibly unique circumstance. I'm sorry, but
No, but we're not talking about
the
the
thing is,
spread. We're talking about, like,
so
in
can you
Iceland,
put it in
they had.
terms that everyone can sort of very clearly understand? Like when I'm talking about the amount of people, or like the percentage of fatality or whatever, like can you explain to me why this number that I'm reading is like so much higher than the number you're citing? Like what's the difference? How are you measuring it? What are you talking about that's so different?
And people who died. And so you're taking the deaths and dividing it by the number of people who tested positive. Most people who got COVID, we don't know they got COVID. We never tested them. We didn't have enough tests. They were asymptomatic. So what I do is that I use serological tests, antibody tests. So when people make antibody studies where they look how many people got infected, then we know much more precisely how many people actually got infected. And then if you just compare that
So how do
with,
those antibody studies, how do they tell us? Can you explain that?
well, they tell us that when, for example, the test showed us that there was 1 million cases, often there can be up to 30 million cases. There are many more cases than we can find with the test because our contact tracing and our number of tests are not efficient enough. So, for example, how many times did you get tested for COVID?
I have not been tested for COVID.
I have not been tested for COVID. Like, you see, like maybe you got it. No one would know. But if you got it and you didn't die, then, I mean, that's going to influence the IFR. And the WHO itself says it. Do you want me to get you the website from the WHO when where they say that you cannot look at the case fatality rate, that the case fatality rate is flawed and is grossly overestimating the real thing? Let me come back to 2009. In 2009, the H1N1 was supposed to be 27% of dead. Then it was supposed to be 5% of dead. Then it was supposed to be 1% of dead. And finally, it's 0.015% of dead. That's the reality. So
right.
the case fatality rate can really lie.
Right, but we don't even have evidence that once you get COVID and have COVID, you can't just get it again. I mean, there have been
But
cases
this
where
doesn't
people
really matter
have.
because we have but we have proof that it is a seasonal, like it is a bell-shaped curve virus, meaning that it will attack a certain region during specific months and it won't attack them all around the year. Just like influenza, it attacks during specific months of the year. In Arabia Saudi, it attacks in June. In Texas, it attacks in January, I think, or February. I mean, each region have different months during which influenza will attack. This is the case for 95% of respiratory virus, by the way. 95% of respiratory virus are seasonal, like they have a specific month where they attack. And it's already been maybe not completely proven, but it's been quite proven that it is the case for SARS-CoV2 as well. And it is the case for every other coronaviruses.
So I've certainly not seen any proof of that. But in fact,
do you need the studies?
whole, like, it's going to go away. Well, I mean, I do remember a lot of talk about.
I mean, it is the case for 95% of viruses. 95% of viruses, it's the case. SARS-CoV2, I believe it is the case as well.
I need to see a study, right? Because
of course,
we were also told that it would quote unquote go away in the summer, right? Which it did not do. When they remained open, they had everything open. We saw like a massive spike in Florida, right?
I don't agree with you.
It's a continuing issue. I have people who I know in Florida, and they are dealing with it right now. They're in like a very precarious situation. So, I would put it to you that, this is a real problem, that people do go to the hospital, the services at the hospital get overwhelmed, deaths will spike. It's not addressed, right? So, without referring to like a global conspiracy, which we haven't talked about yet, I'm very curious. I want to talk about that, but without needing to invoke that, we can explain, the government's action on this issue. We can see that they want to protect the economy, protect their citizens. They don't want massive, like, spreading of a virus uncontrolled. Instead, institute some common sense regulation that at least here in Canada, we've done, reasonably well with sort of shutting down. And now that things have sort of shut down, like a reopening. And, I think this kind of common sense approach where, you know, you do have to take some risks or whatever, as soon as like that infection rate that we were talking about earlier begins to spike up again, you then close things down. So I don't see the need, I guess, to invoke a massive conspiracy. And I think,
Well, there's a problem. I cannot move on to the conspiracy if I don't first. That's why we're talking about the dangerosity of the virus, because I don't have any proof for conspiracy apart from I only have proof that it is not due to the virus. I never said there is a conspiracy. Like, I have guesses, but I don't care about the guesses. I care about the fact. I care about the studies.
Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is that, if what you're saying is true, which is that everyone has just had COVID without knowing it, and it's actually much, much, much more spreadable than we knew, but it's much
No,
less.
it is much less
deadly.
spreadable. No, it is much less spreadable than we think, but it infected much more than it is much less spreadable than we think, but the number of cases is much higher than the official one.
So how would they be higher if it's less spreadable? Wouldn't it have to be more spreadable for them to be higher?
Not really, because if you look at the percentage, look at the cases, for example, for the USA or for any country, let's take Canada, for example, or Sweden. Let's take Sweden, for example.
Sure. Yeah, I want to look at.
So Sweden, for example, they have. Let me see how many cases they have, real quick. Can you tell me the number of cases for Sweden?
Sure. Is this? I just want to make sure this is up to date. Anyway, when this was taken,
I see 84,000 cases. Okay.
Okay.
So what is the population of Sweden? It's around 10 million, I believe. Yes. So if we divide 84,000 by 10 million and we multiply by 100, so we see they have had 0.84% of their population infected, okay, according to cases. That's almost nothing, right? 0.2084. That's what the cases tell us. But now, when they made serological study, and I can pull up the study for you if you want, we see that countrywide, they had 4.5% of infected amongst their whole population. Without lockdown, 4.5% of the population infected is less than what we expected from a virus with such a high RT. That's less than what the study said we would have. They were talking about 60% of the population infected. By the way, it's not because of the density. If you just take their capital, it's 8%. And the capital, it has quite a high density of population, 8%. So it's much lower than every single study that was made. So the spread is lower than expected. Yet the real number of infection, which is 8% for the capital, 4% nationwide, is much higher than the official number of cases, because the official number of cases is 0.84. It's less than 1% of the population that gets infected. And that's Sweden. Sweden, I mean, they used a lot of tests. They are one of they used 100,000 tests per million population. So this is what I'm telling you. If you take the number of deaths and divide it by the number of cases, well, countries which cannot test efficiently will have very, very high mortality rates, like a case fatality ratio. And countries which test a lot will have a very low case fatality ratio. And the case fatality ratio is useless during a pandemic. It can go all the way from 0% up to 30%. It's completely useless. You shouldn't even look at it. I mean, you could look at it, but you cannot take conclusion based on that. And this is why everyone talks of the IFR. We don't talk of the CFR. We talk of the IFR, infection fatality rate. And then that's where you can see the true deadliness of the virus. And then, I mean, we could debate if I am right and if 0.05, or if the CDC is right and it's 0.26. And there's like a difference there's a small difference. But I mean, what you're telling me about with 5%, 3%, and those type of things are just crazy. They don't exist. And by the way, if you're curious about herd immunity is a complete myth. And I sent you the study about how this is a bell-shaped curve disease. But to be honest, I wouldn't need to send you that, because you can look at almost every single country. Like, I mean,
Well,
I could give
I
you
would-
some
I
pictures,
would
but like
advise
if
you
you look at
to-
France, Arabia Saudi, Italy, Spain, UK, almost every country, you see that bell-shaped curve. Regardless of lockdown, regardless of anything, even in Sweden, you see it. I showed you Sweden; it's a bell-shaped curve.
I would disagree that you see the same curve regardless of lockdown. I think we can perform an experiment. So you can Google, let's say, Canada coronavirus, and you can go and go to statistics. You can see that curve, which I think is clearly, gets to a high point somewhere late April, early May, and then
Wait a second. Are you
falls
looking at
dramatically.
case, or are you looking at what are you looking at?
Oh, the daily change,
Cases or deaths?
number of daily cases, just daily cases.
Okay, so give me a second, real quick. Let me
Daily new
just.
cases. All right, and then we can look at the same for the U.S. And you can see that
Yes,
the United
just
States
give me a
does
second.
not.
I'm getting the. Just let me look at the graph. So Canada. All right. So you're telling me
just
it
in
started.
Google Canada
Yeah.
coronavirus, and then
All
you
right.
can find the chart just right at the top, and just look at new cases, right? So I do agree that it's going down in the States, but this States chart looks like not a bell curve. It goes up and spikes ridiculously in the beginning of April, then kind of slowly drops off, although maybe is plateauing or something until the end of May, and then it ridiculously spikes up to incredibly high, near 80,000 daily cases, around July 10th, something like that, and then begins to fall off until now it's above 40,000, around 40,000. Okay.
All right, but
that is not
here's the issue. Why are you looking at the number of?
Right?
Yeah, but
if you look at the Canadian graph, it is responding directly to our policies around lockdown, right? As soon as we lift the policies around lockdown, we have an opening, things are going back up again. Now, if you look at Germany as well,
wait a second. Let's say
on
Canada for a second.
Shape as Canada.
So let's say on Canada for a second. When did they implement the lockdown? Like, because and also I would like to point out that you're just looking at the infection, and let me just show you. You have to understand that if you look at deaths, or if you look at hospitalization, or if you look at
I'm looking at the spread
positivity rates
of this virus. I'm looking at the spread of this virus, right?
Yeah, but in order to look, but you have to understand that if you make twice more tests, you can have twice more cases, even if the spread didn't change. So it's important to look at everything.
Sure, but if the rate of testing goes up by a little bit and the rate of cases goes up by a lot,
but this is not the case. Let me show you. Let me show you the rate of the positivity rate. And also, you have to account that the positivity rate will never reach zero, and you will always have case due to false positive, because the tests are not 100% precise. And you can. I'm not sure for Canada.
Sure, I would grant they're not 100% precise.
I mean, it depends.
But that doesn't
it depends on the country. It depends on the country. But
throw out these stats, right?
Usually it's 3%. But look, you see, like that's the positivity rate. There's not all of those crazy things everywhere. And if you look at the deaths, there's not all of those crazy things everywhere. By the way, most likely, and we can check that, the reason there is such a spike on May 3rd is usually just because there were some paperwork which were delayed and all arrived at the same time. You know that those deaths are marked when they receive the paper, not like at the date.
Wait,
that
but how much are they testing? How much have they increased testing between these?
What I showed you is a positivity rate, and if you want to look at the number of tests,
but
I
this
have
is a
it right
percent
here.
of tests.
This is positivity rate. Yeah, positivity rate in percent.
So if they're massively increasing their testing, wouldn't the rate go down? Because before they were testing in like targeted areas, and now they're just like testing.
Yeah, of course. This is why we need to look a little bit at everything in order to have a good picture. And this is what you should do every time. If you only look at one single data, you cannot have a good feel of the situation and of the real spread. You cannot just look at one data. You have to look at all the data at once in order to make sure you're not missing anything. And so here, for example, you have positivity rates, the number of tests, you have the number of deaths, and you have the number of infection, which you already pinged. And I am sorry, but you were telling me we cannot see any type of bell curve, but I might need to disagree. Like if you compare with the Sweden graph earlier, you see that it's pretty similar to the Sweden graph earlier, wouldn't you say? Especially the deaths. The deaths are very similar to Sweden.
I would say that you look at Sweden and you see basically an uncontrolled growth, the highest death rates in the world, like according to population. And then, thankfully, blessedly, we see some fall off from that. And now we are, perhaps it's going to go away on its own, or the measures that people took have been effective. In countries with serious responses like Germany or Canada, where they've shut down their economy, we see an initial spike followed by a sharp decrease, and then as they reopen, a very slow increase again. Now, whether that will increase again up to where it was, or whether it'll just increase and be a sort of a smaller hump, I don't know. Now, in America, you have essentially a schizophrenic graph, right? Because there's been no coherent policy. So you have, the first initial spike, which I guess is like represented by like, the tragedies in New York with like incredibly high death rates. And then now with, a huge other spike that's like on top of that spike, you have, the
okay, but wait a second. Look, that's Germany. Texas. Look at Germany. How do you not see the bell curve? Like that's Germany. You cited Germany. How do you not see the bell curve?
No, what I'm saying is that there is a spike, then they implement lockdowns, and then it goes down.
No, but it's not going down. It's literally a bell-shaped curve in every single country. Even country which didn't lock down, like Iceland didn't lock down, and they have a bell-shaped curve. Sweden didn't lock down, and they have a bell-shaped curve.
Iceland, dude, you can't cite Iceland. It's an island that had like no coronavirus. Like it's an island.
What do you mean? They had thousands of cases. All right, so let's take South Korea. They didn't lock down. Any country that didn't, almost every country has those bell-shaped curve. Like it's really hard to find a region that doesn't have this bell-shaped curve. The only reason America doesn't have this bell-shaped curve is because first, look at New York. How come? Look at the protests in New York. How come the virus is not coming back? It's not coming back because it cannot come back. And I sent you a paper, and I sent you other papers that clearly shows that it's seasonal. Like it can't infect people depending on the season.
It's not a matter of the season. We clearly know it's not a matter of the season. I think it's about the spread outside. Plus, a lot of those people at protests are wearing masks and facial protection, and probably respecting social distancing to the extent that they can. Right? I think, it was certainly an unknown sort of thing at the beginning, whether it would cause like a massive spread, but it seems like it hasn't, because that's just not the way coronavirus spreads. But there are certain things like going to a club, right, or an event with like 1,000 people at it, like a stadium. You have one person scream, then their spit aerosolizes, and you have what's called a super spreader event, where hundreds of people can all get sick at once. So it's not a simple matter of, what we've been able to do with these lockdowns. And it's also a matter of once everyone gets together, and if people just act like it's nothing weird is going on, if people go to a concert and, it's too soon, then we could have like massive spikes. We could have like 100.
Okay, but you can do all the concerts you want in April in New York. No one will get influenza, and you can all stay at home during the winter, and everyone will still get influenza. What you can do is make the spread, and send you a paper that analyzes precisely that. And
right, but influenza is not a massive hog in our hospitals' resources that affects like the treatment.
Oh, it's higher actually. No, it's higher. I told you. 2 years ago in the USA, they had 810,000 people hospitalized for the flu, but for COVID so far, and in just 22 weeks, for COVID so far, we've had 500,000 in the USA. So it's putting more strain on our hospital. There's a CDC number, by the way. Just check the CDC hospitalization rate: 810,000 for the flu 2 years ago in the 22-week period, 500,000 so far for COVID. I mean, it's just that easy. And COVID is in the summer. In the summer, the hospitals do not have a lot of strain from other diseases. And I sent you a paper, like multiple paper. I sent you 2. I could send you more, showing that just like 95% of respiratory viruses, it doesn't spread all year round in every region. It spreads all year round in the world, but not in a specific region.
Cases do spike in the summer, though, like specifically in Florida in the summer. So certainly it's not going to like get killed by heat, as some were saying. Right.
I never said it's dictated by heat. I said that it has a bell-shaped curve, which is different based on the region. Influenza isn't dictated by heat. Do you think influenza was dictated by heat? In Africa, influenza spread during the hottest months.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with heat. But it still doesn't spread all year round. And if you lock down, like if people go to concerts during the summer and lock down during the winter, you will still see this bell-shaped curve during the winter in the case of influenza in New York, for example, because influenza spreads during the winter in New York.
Okay, so you do agree that lockdowns can exist for like common sense reasons, right? That would be good. First of all, we can come together on that point that we could lock down during the worst times of the year. Now,
wait a second. Are you telling me we should lock down for influenza? I don't understand.
No, what I'm saying is that, sorry, you were talking about influenza, but if we can see that there is a curve, a bell-shaped curve, as you say, with this virus, we can also, if left alone in a place like Sweden, we could also say that in places like Germany or Canada that took measures, we can see a different curve, so that we can say that even if it is seasonal, we could take certain actions during that season and affect the curve, right?
You can't affect action. That is my point. You cannot affect the curve. You can reduce the number of deaths, but you cannot affect the shape of the curve. You can affect the height of the curve, but the width of the curve is a myth. Like flatten the curve is false. Flatten the curve. Like if you say flatten the curve, it would be like saying if we lock down during winter, the flu season will not just happen during 22 weeks. It will continue up until April. It's false. It happens during specific months, no matter what you do. What you can do is just reduce the number of deaths. Yes, you can do that. You can reduce the height of the bell, but you cannot make it anything else than a bell if it was supposed to be a bell in the first place.
So I just, can we agree that certain policies like locking down do seem to have an effect, that the number of new cases, at least, that we can see, go on Google, you type in Canada coronavirus, you like go to the statistics thing, just like right at the very top, you can see right after we implemented the policies, a sharp decline. Germany, see right after you implemented the policies there, a sharp decline. You can see in both cases, as soon as there's a relaxation, there's a very slight uptick, right? Whether that uptick will grow into a full, it'll get as bad as it did, who knows?
I don't agree with you, because if you look at hospitalization and if you look at positivity rate, there's no uptick when they open.
Sure, because a growing number of resources have all been devoted towards.
It doesn't really matter to the number. It doesn't really matter to the number of I told you about hospitalization. I knew you were gonna say that for death rate, so I precisely said hospitalization and positivity rate. Which country did those two go up when they reopened? Because in Florida and in Texas, I'm sorry, but those guys never had their first wave in the first place. The wave came first in the north, and then it went out and it never came back. And then the wave came very strongly in the south, and now it's already like finished. Like it's already they're almost finished in the south with it. They're on their way down. And they never reached maximum capacity in their hospitals.
Right,
and the number of hospitalization is not going back up when they reopen. Like name me one country where it goes back up when they reopen. Like for example, Germany. Right, Germany's the number of cases goes back up, but not the number of hospitalization. It's just that they test more and more efficiently. The contact tracing is becoming more efficient as well. So, but
But in Texas, there's like in I believe Houston, isn't there like the largest like hospital complex thing in the entire world? It's like, maybe that's completely false, but there was like a giant freaking like 20 giant hospitals all smashed together in the middle of Houston, and it's like, they have an incredible amount of medical resources. They all had a lot of time to prepare. They prepared as hard as they possibly could, and thankfully they had a low death rate because of all of those resources and all that preparation.
Why are you talking
Right.
about the death rate? I'm talking about the number of people who are sick enough to show up at the hospital. There's not enough of those people. Those numbers are almost none. I mean, they are not almost none, but they are almost twice lower than the flu 2 years ago in the USA. And in Germany, you keep telling me that Europe, when people, like in Germany and in Europe, you have huge protests in the street. Huge protests. I mean, it's riots everywhere. No one cares about lockdown anymore. And the restaurants are open, the cinemas are open. And there are still many cases, by the way, but it doesn't go back up. There are more cases than there was in March, and yet it doesn't go back up. Maybe the case go back up, but not the positivity rate, not the hospitalization rate, not the death rate. And so you might say that because we have better technique to help people, they don't die, but they would still need to show up at the hospital if they had a problem in the first place.
Right. No, I mean, I can't explain the positivity rates going down, but perhaps these things and these policies you spoke of in Germany had a good effect, right? But you do see now that they're opening up their schools in Berlin, like a massive outbreak of COVID in the schools, right? And that's what they're fighting.
Yeah, but the hospitalizations don't go back up.
So
and the infection rate, by the way, barely go back up. By the way, if you look at, let's take Germany. If you look at Germany, the infection is barely going back up, like barely, and the hospitalization, the people showing at the hospital, like
So I
really
agree
like,
that Germany
zero,
is a
basically.
success story. But the reason Germany is a success story is because it took incredibly serious action right away. Had like marshaled a lot of resources, did a lot of contact tracing.
How does it matter to the virus if you have 2,000 people? Well, yeah, but how does it matter to the virus if today they have 2,000 people sick and people are going to the restaurant and people are protesting and people are going outside and there is 2,000 people sick in the population? Why doesn't it spread exponentially while it did in March or in April?
So that was back when there were no controls, right? At the very beginning, there were no controls, so it was spreading very rapidly. Now that things are back open, I don't know where you are with like the reopening and stuff, but things are certainly not back to normal. People are still required to wear masks everywhere they go. People have to like constantly sanitize their hands and like wash them all the time. People, if they go to a restaurant, which is open, it's like they go to a patio served by like someone in a mask, and like the tables are all spaced apart, right? Which Sweden did as well. It's not like they didn't know regulations. So even in these places where we're seeing less of a spread than it was, at least in Ontario, we're seeing more spread, but it's very spiky. So it's like there'll be like an outbreak where like 30 people will get it at like a nail salon or something, or the 200 people who all got it at the Brass Rail Strip Club or something, and but those are sort of like outbreaks. As long as people take their precautions, it seems like it is manageable to control. At least so far. I don't know. We'll have to see with the school reopening.
Yet we're not managing to other diseases. How come? How come we're not managing? How come we're not managing other diseases? How come other diseases spread as any previous year? Respiratory diseases.
They're not an unprecedented pandemic that's sweeping.
No, but here's my question. You're telling me that we both agree that there was a ton of deaths, a ton of hospitalization, then it stopped. I'm saying, yeah, of course it stopped. Every virus, 95% of them, it comes, then it stops. It made a bell curve just like every other virus. Seems logical. What you're telling me is that we took precaution, it stops because of the precaution, but not the other infectious disease. Like the precautions are great against COVID, but all other infectious disease which transmit through the hands, through the air, through the cough, those keep spreading. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. You're telling me, yeah, this virus is part of the 5% that actually keeps spreading all year round, and it's just because we are so good at stopping the spread that we managed to keep him to keep it down. Yet all the viruses keep spreading.
So I haven't made any claims about the nature of coronavirus, whether it spreads or not during the summer or whatever. But I would say that there was a lot of talk about how it wouldn't spread during the summer, and then it clearly did spread during the summer in Florida and Texas and California.
Yeah, but you have to understand that in Florida, Texas, and California, it didn't spread during April.
Okay.
And it's just like every other disease, like every single disease that's the case.
During the summer? So it did spread during the summer?
Well, I mean, it's like in New York, it stopped spreading in the summer, but in Texas, it spreaded only in the summer. Like, I don't know who told you that. I'm not telling you that. As I told you, this is not how seasonal diseases work. Like, take influenza, for example. In equatorial country, in the jungle, where there are crocodiles and alligators, it's going to spread during February and during August. In New York, it's going to spread during December. In Africa and Arabia Saudi, it's going to spread around June. Like, come on, like, whoever told you about summer and winter is just a factor. That's not how it works worldwide. The bell curve only works regionally. When you start taking a whole continent and you look at mountains near Canada and you look at alligator field in Florida and deserts in Texas, like, no, the virus doesn't care about human-made lines that we call country. It cares about regions and climate and humidity and dozens of factors. And it just so happened that, yeah, it is a bell-shaped curve virus, and it just so happened to have spread in what we call temperate countries during April, and it happened to spread on more equatorial climate during other time of the year later on.
See, I would.
And by the way, it doesn't mean that the next year it's going to be during the same months, but clearly we see that bell-shaped curve, and clearly when we compare with other virus, we know for a fact that it's not human-made actions, because human-made actions, and we have the proof from Finland and Norway, do reduce the spread of all other infections as well. And therefore, as right now, other infections spread as they did during all previous year at the same season, we infer that our actions to stop the spread of viruses are not very useful. There are many other ways to do it. You can also compare not the deaths, because you always compare the deaths from Sweden, but you can also compare the infection rate. If you compare the infection rate for a similar density, you can also have a conclusion. It's not just that. You can also compare infections during in people who stayed at home and infections in workers that kept working, in essential workers. There have been multiple studies like that. They took serological tests, once again, antibody test, and they looked at
those essential workers.
Yeah.
Sorry, but like those essential workers, their safety depends upon other people staying home, right?
No, but here's what you have to understand, is that the proportion of people who got infected is higher for the people staying home than for the essential worker. So basically, people working were less likely to get infected than people staying home. That's the case in New York, that's the case in Italy, that's the case in Spain, and there are already 2 preprints about it in Germany and France. And for Italy, Spain, and New York, it was governmental studies, by the way. And you can see Cuomo talking about it, and I can link you. Let me find you the link for Italy and Spain. Well, it's a Ministry of Health, so it's going to be Italian and Spanish, of course.
So I can speak directly to the experience of my city, Toronto, and you definitely see that that the most affected by COVID are the industrial workers, especially the industrial food
show me the study.
Workers, quote unquote. Sure, yeah, I
show me the study.
I can show that to you. Yeah, and definitely. How the northwest of Toronto, yeah. But yeah, you can see that these people working in factories is where you actually saw a lot of these outbreaks, because they're in indoor spaces, probably not very well ventilated, people working very closely to one another, and they weren't shut down right during the when everyone else shut down. They in fact ramped up because there are now a lot more people going to the grocery store.
Yeah, but there is a big methodology error in what you just said. The methodology error is that what I'm giving you is that after the fact, once the epidemic was over, you can look at the number of cases, the number of death, hospitalization cases, whatever you want. In Italy, it's pretty over. In France, it's pretty over. In Spain, it's pretty over. You can look at all of that, and they just made serological studies. So after the fact, in order to know in the end who got more infected, and that's how they saw that people staying at home got more infected. Now, what you're talking about is not those kind of studies. You're just talking about people with PCR tests, so the test that allows you to know if you're infected right now, which are going around doing contact tracing. And obviously, every time they find one single worker who's infected, they're going to look for every single other worker that worked with him, and they're going to find a lot of infected very easily. But in order to know who's infected in their house, they cannot go house to house to house to house and force people to get tests. They can't do that. But in the factory, if one guy gets infected, they can force the factory to not let anyone work unless they take the test. And then everyone in that factory is forced to take the test. And this is very efficient contact tracing. And they cannot do that with the homes.
So I agree those things exist, and there are certain errors that may come about.
It is not certain errors.
Invalidates these studies. Certainly, the people who made these studies would also.
Studies. When you don't make a randomized studies, it is flawed by nature. Like, it's not a randomized study.
Okay.
So that's a big deal, right? If it's not randomized, if it's just a study where you pick and choose who you test and who you don't test, like this, and clearly it makes contact tracing like 100 times more efficient when you do it with factory workers, which are forced to be tested if they want to keep working, and just random people in their houses who are supposed to be in lockdown. Which is a huge methodological fallacy, which isn't present in the test in the studies I gave you. And let me find you so for Kumo, New York didn't release the study, but you can see a video of Kumo actually talking to you about the results of this study.
I do want to put it forward though that you are saying this without actually looking at the study that I.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just referring the methodology you gave me. That you were talking about what the study makes. But okay, let me read it. Give me just 1 minute.
Yeah, because we're looking at people who work in manufacturing jobs.
Wait a second.
People who work.
Where is the study? That's just a news article.
So it's outlined in this article, but you can, and the article has a lot of nice maps and stuff you can look through. But I mean, it is a study.
It's a very, very big. It's a big article. I mean, I can't spend 10 minutes reading it.
Sure. But what you see is that in the worst
neighborhoods, hyperlink for the? Yeah.
Basically, in those neighborhoods that have the least access to social services, those that are underserved by the system, those people who are lowest income, who work particularly in the type of jobs that I said, sort of like food service industry or especially like industrial food service industry in the city's northwest, were particularly hard hit by this, right? Now, you could say it's all testing or whatever. It's all like a methodology error. But it does seem like, this is a pretty well-sourced study.
Yeah, but how do you know it's causation and not correlation? How do you know there's no more density of people in those areas as well, for example?
So
how do you know it's not just a correlation, but you're inputting causation on it?
So I am not making any strong claims. I'm just pointing to this study, which seems to show that there is some very strong correlation between these things, and then it outlines some of the reasons that might be responsible for this correlation, right? I don't think there's any one thing that's going to explain it. It's certainly not just the fact the food.
But who made the study? I don't find the hyperlink to the actual study. Who made the study? Is that from someone trustworthy?
Yeah, it's the Toronto Public Health.
The Toronto Public Health. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So,
but I mean, I'm sorry, but
I
find it less interesting that my studies, because I clearly knew who stayed at home and who didn't in the study, and it was a randomized study. In your study, it's just about like the area of Canada that got, or the area of Toronto that got the most hit the worst.
No, but
and I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Right.
So
But
mine
also
is
about
different. Mine is like they literally knew like the percentage of retirees, the percentage of students, the percentage of essential workers, the percentage of health workers. Like it was a very serious study. It wasn't just, hey, look, the Northeast got very infected and they happen to have a lot of workers. Like I don't find that very serious.
Sure. I mean, I would just point to the fact that, you know, people who go to work are reliant on the fact that other people stay home to safely get to work. Their safety is ensured by having something like having certain essential workers, and the others, you know, people who can remotely work or people who are not essential. That was essential for them to do their job safely, and that perhaps the higher percentage of safety they have is because they're literally going to like the same thing every single day as like a routine, whereas people who are at home are more likely to venture out, do something unroutine. They
I
also have to go to the
understand,
grocery
but
store, they have to go do other things, right?
But if
So
we
they're
make
not
a
just
small
at home.
compilation of all of that, we see that in multiple countries, essential worker gets infected less. We see that in Stockholm, for example, with a density of 4,800 people, they have 8% infection. And if you look at any city with similar percentage of people, they have pretty similar percentage of infection as well. When you look at serological tests, once again, because looking at case is too hard, because you have to compare the number of tests, the efficiency of contact tracing, the false positivity rate. It's a headache. If you look at serological study, you have good information. And you look also, for example, at randomized PCR tests that were made, where they did make PCR tests but made it randomly. You look at experience like the Diamond Princess and all of the boat, like the cruise boat with thousands and thousands of people. The Diamond Princess was 3,600 people. All of those people, we know their comorbidity, we know their age, they have been tested. You see that the spread never goes above 25% or 20%. Never, no matter what, even in the worst conditions. There is no worse condition than a cruise ship with mostly old people and a mean age of 58 years old, where they didn't know coronavirus was a thing, didn't social distance, just dancing and having fun all day in a small boat, all crammed together with a huge density of people, and they didn't reach more than 25% infected. So this virus doesn't infect a lot of people. It cannot, and it has been proven why since then. It's due to cross immunity, by the way, with other coronavirus. Like up to 40 to 70% of people were already immune to this virus before it even appeared. And I can send you the study, by the way, the Cell Journal, the greatest, like one of the most funded laboratory in Europe, in Marseille. I mean, like, this is fact. Most people were already immune thanks to cross immunity, and I can send you the study about that. And this is why we never see that much spread. And then we can compare the spread also in those type of environment, notably Stockholm. Not only Stockholm, there are also 2 other cities in Sweden where they made studies, and compare that with other countries. And you see that you might say the deaths are very high in Sweden. Well, their hospitals weren't overrun, and their infection rate is very low. It's 8%. So I'm not sure why, and nationwide it's 4.5%. So I'm not sure why their deaths are so high. Maybe it's just because the way they define the deaths. I already sent you an article showing you how different Ministry of Health have very different type of definitions. So all of that put together, okay. I mean, so basically I look at the end how many people got infected in country with lockdown, with no lockdown. I don't see much difference. I look at people who stayed at home, people who are essential worker. I don't see much difference. I look at other diseases than COVID. I look at other disease other than COVID disease, which compared with previous years. So the 5 previous years, how much disease, infectious disease were infecting people during those periods. And I look now during lockdown, I see it's similar. So I'm sorry, lockdown are not that efficient. They were efficient in some country. They were very efficient in Finland. They were very efficient in Norway. They were very efficient in many countries. But when it comes to France, Italy, UK, Germany, USA, Canada, all of those, well, Canada, I'm not sure.
Well,
but
Germany
most countries
did it well, and Canada did it pretty well.
They didn't. Yeah, I think. No, well, I don't know about Canada, but Germany, they didn't do it well.
I mean,
if you look at the percentage of infected according to serological test, it's similar to everyone else. And if you look at the percentage of infection from other disease compared with previous years, it's similar.
I'm just looking at daily new cases, man.
Yeah, but that's the issue, is that you're looking at PCR cases which are grossly different, and you can clearly see that every country have different numbers which don't make any sense, because it's too impacted by false positivity rate, it's too impacted by contact tracing, because they all use different types of tests. They all have different efficiency in contact tracing, and they all use different amount of testings. And also, so I mean, just that alone, there are also other factors, but just that alone changes the data a lot.
So, right, but all of those things would make it higher.
It would make the spread higher, but if the spread is higher but the deaths aren't, then it means it's really not a big issue. We know the spread is higher. Like, if you look at it, like, no. Are you really believing that less than 1%?
How is it not a big issue? So
do you really? But wait a second. Do you really believe that less than 1%? Do you really believe that in a country like Sweden, where there wasn't any lockdown, less than 1% of the population got infected? Do you really believe that's true? I don't. Serological tests don't.
Had one of the highest death rates in the world because of
exactly.
their policies. The other countries around it that did do a lockdown refused to open their borders to them. Situation that I would, agree, you know, is happening with the United States and Canada, right? We're not going to open our borders.
All right. So how come they have less? Like, let's take your methodology. So your methodology is caring about the cases. Like, you don't care about what I care about. You care about the cases. We already seen that according to what you care about, the cases, it's 0.86% of the population that got infected in Sweden. Do you want to look at, let's say, France, for example? In France, we got 293. Divided by 67. Okay, so if I didn't make a mistake, yeah, it's 0.5. It's slightly lower. Yeah, it's like 30% lower. So it was a bad case to take. But still, do you really believe that worldwide, it never spread more than 1%? Maybe in the USA, they made a lot of tests. Maybe they have a different type of number. Let's see for the USA.
Sure, but it's not merely the testing in the USA. It's not like that. What Trump said was like true, that they were the greatest in testing and therefore had like a lot of cases only because of the testing. They have a lot of cases because they have a lot of cases.
Well, I mean, that's weird then, because like the USA had twice more spread according to cases than Sweden. Like they have 1.9 and Sweden has only 0.86. Sure. Yet they don't have but why
really
no, I'm talking like this. I'm talking of Sweden.
So their Medicare in the UK has been gutted, and they have incredibly high population density.
No, but wait a second. I was saying like Sweden had 0.86, USA has 1.9. So the USA have more than twice the number of cases per population than Sweden. Yet they have less deaths per population, for example. You see what I mean? You cannot look at cases. I mean, let me show you what the...
No, you can and should look at cases. Cases are not going to tell you the whole story, but the fact that...
But cases are not as precise as serological tests. Serological test is more important than cases. Can you agree on that?
So I would look at all things, and I would look at your data. I think that's very important, right? But I don't think any of this really goes to prove your point. So can we maybe get on track? So what is necessary for us to agree about before we can move forward? Because I want to talk about the juicy stuff. I want to talk about the world conspiracy
because we need to agree about... I'm not talking about world conspiracy, by the way. I don't believe in world conspiracies. I was talking about the mortality, basically, because there are three things: the spread, first thing; the high infection fatality rate, the second thing; And when you have those two things, you have the mortality, meaning that if we don't do anything, if we don't lock down at all, how many people are gonna die? So people were already talking about, wow, if 60% of the world population got it and 3% of it would die, it would be horrible. And I'm trying to show you that 60% will never get it, no matter what. Most of them are already immune. Like, we're nowhere near that.
Okay,
My number, which says that we are around 10% maximum, usually, like in average, and your numbers that says that we are at 1% maximum in average.
Right. Okay. I just like, I come from a time when, some planes hit the Twin Towers and like 2,700 people died. We were all really sad about it. We invaded 2 countries, although Canada didn't actually join you on one of those. But like, those nearly 3,000 people seem to matter a lot. But like, okay, so 67%, then it's like not 1.75 million. Maybe it's like half that. Maybe it's only 750,000 people. Like, how many people does it need to be for you to think the government should like institute some policy that we should all have to?
First of all, it's about a virus. So like the flu makes 61,000 people dead. The flu makes more dead than the Vietnam War, plus the World Trade Center, plus whatever you want to add. Every single year, just the flu. First of all.
That's adding up all the years together.
No, like
has only existed for less than
like
a year.
just like 2 years ago, it was a bad year, 61,000 just in the USA. USA alone, 61,000 dead, like that, 22 weeks, just the flu alone.
How many people have died from coronavirus in less than a year?
Well, it was less than a year. It was 22 weeks. I told you. And right now, as I told you, we can come back to it, but it's not 180,000. It's less than the flu. It's less than 61,000 in the USA. Like, if we use the same definition, like, you cannot compare apples and orange. Like, the methodology and the definition for the flu is not the same definition and same methodology for COVID. And you just go on the CDC website and you type definition deaths, and they will tell you about that. Which is a good thing. We always do that for new viruses. We did that that's how we deal with new viruses.
So there have been 184,000 deaths due to COVID. I know you don't count them because of comorbidities or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and that's been less than a year. So that's more than about 3 times the amount of people that died from the flu in that incredibly high off year. So this is 3 times that. So we should probably do something because this problem is actually
really, because
it exists at this level. And
if you were to use the same definition and count anyone with the flu who dies as a death from the flu, then you would have much more than 61,000 people dead according to stats. It's not the same definition. So you cannot compare the two numbers, which makes sense. Like, you cannot have 3 times more deaths, but twice less hospitalization. Like, despite the spread supposedly being higher, like, your version just doesn't stand on its feet. Your version is that it spreads more than the flu, kills more than the flu, hospitalized less than the flu. Wait, there's a problem there. You clearly see that your version of things do not stand up.
I mean,
in Italy, so in Italy, why do you refuse to look at the coroner studies in Italy? Why do you refuse to look at the randomized study in Iceland? You told me in Iceland it's not the same thing. It is the same thing because IFR, infection fatality rate, doesn't depend on the spread. So you can say that the virus doesn't spread over there, but if you have 2,000 people that has the virus and only 5 of them die, that tells you something, especially once you ponder it by comorbidity and age. Because the tests were randomized. If you don't randomize the test, then it's useless to take a conclusion. And as I told you, serological tests, which are randomized as well, and look at any type of infection in the past from COVID, it clearly shows you. The CDC tells you 0.26%. Oxford University, they used to tell you 0.01%. Now I think they took it up to a little bit above 0.1. I mean, as I told you, right now the consensus among
the case fatality rate
the consensus
is much higher than that.
I'm talking about the infection fatality rate and the consensus about the scientists, not the case fatality rate. Infection fatality rate, and the consensus among scientists is that it's at 0.17 right now.
Okay.
It's
okay. I mean, the point though that it could be much higher than like the amount of people that have it could be much higher, but it has like a lower dangerousness. So the amount of deaths we see is the exact same. Just goes to show that we do in fact need to take it seriously, right?
no, because the deaths are not
You haven't shown
the
that
same
we
definition.
shouldn't take this seriously. You've shown that. I think we can agree that we can look at the different shapes of these curves in these different countries. We can see that government policy had a clear effect in the shape of these curves. The governments did, they may not have had access to the most perfect science. They may not have acted in the most perfect way, but we can see that they acted in such a way as to protect their citizens in like a reasonable manner. At least some of them did. And we can see that, in terms of Germany or Canada, that these lockdowns had a direct effect on the number of cases that are being reported every day. The number of people dying is affected by other things, but we can look at the spread of the disease. I think the best way to do that, continuing spread, is again that number, the RO number.
Yeah,
The
but now you're
average or
coming
whatever,
back
the
to
RT,
now
right?
you're coming back
To
to
see
yeah, but wait a second.
to show that the lockdowns have a direct effect on this number. They have a direct effect on the number of new cases, which are going to be spawned as a result of that number, right? The number of people each person who has the virus infects, right? It's going to be directly affected by whether that person is at a club partying down, screaming loudly and aerosolizing and like their breath in like a super spreader incident, or whether they're safely behind a mask at home ordering Uber Eats from like a brave deliverer, keeping our society together. So, and you asked me earlier, I guess, like, how is it that I'm not aware of this? And I would just put to you that, like, why is it that you are so aware and have such a different opinion than what is seemingly the consensus on like of the world's experts, if there even could be a consensus? But it seems like you have a very unique interest, a unique perspective on this, and you think that there's an ulterior motive behind these lockdowns. So do you want to talk a little bit about what this ulterior motive is? Because I would put to you that, like, okay, you're right about the science, let's say, for the sake of argument. Perhaps these countries are simply, think the same way I do about the science. They're trying to keep people from getting hurt. So they're imposing this legislation that seems to have an effect based upon these metrics, seems to have an effect. So what is necessary about assuming they're acting with some ulterior motive? Why are you ascribing that?
Well, obviously, if it's not worse than the flu, and okay. So first of all, so let's say that we agree, for sake of arguments, that it's not really worse than flu, and move on to. So first of all, why do I not believe the usual narrative? It's because I look at the Cell Journal, I look at the Lancet Journal, I just open Scientific Journal. When I want to know something about a country, I open the Ministry of Health. So I've looked to the Ministry of Health of Sweden, the Ministry of Health of the CDC, the one of Spain, of Italy, of etc. If, for example, I want to know how many hospitals, like, is Texas hospitals are overloaded. If you go on the Texas health website, they give you the exact number of beds they have, the exact number of ventilators they have, the exact number of ICU beds they have for each hospital, for each district, for the whole state. They tell you how many of them are currently occupied, how many of them are currently free. They tell you everything. That's why I don't have the same narrative as everyone else. It's just because I take my information from somewhere else. And when it comes to general knowledge about epidemiology, it mostly comes from, I just went on Expertscape. It's just something that just grade experts based on the number of studies they release on infectious disease. Not just infectious disease, it's like a website for every type of experts. But in this case, I just looked for who released the most infectious disease studies, who released, basically who are the experts, who are the most knowledgeable on infectious disease. And I took the three first one. That was the Mr. Raoul, head of the biggest research center and most funded research center in Europe, Mr. Zumla, and Mr. Gontret, which were at the top of the list. And I just listened to that to know more about epidemiology. So that's why I have a different view. And now, if you want to take that hypothetical and continue the debate, I'm not going to talk about conspiracies. I'm not about that. I'm going to talk about the negative effect of the lockdown. I'm going to talk about the trillions of dollars that were used, about the countless people sent into poverty, about the countless studies showing you how poverty destroys your health, prevents you from accessing healthcare, prevents you from having good food, prevents you from having education, which also leads to bad health. How pushing people to poverty, there is a direct causation between poverty and lack of health and death, and multiple studies showing that. And worldwide, especially if you look into third world countries, the effect of the world lockdown, even in third world countries that didn't lock down, the effect of the world lockdown is huge. Here I'm in Cambodia, in my country, in a third world country. We see people dying in the streets because they are starving every day since the world lockdown. And our country didn't lock down. Why? Because our sector were tourism, our sector was garment industry, were construction, and all of those got destroyed by the world lockdown. And it's just thousands of people dying every single day, child, woman. I mean, we don't even have 1 million deaths from the coronavirus. We have 10 million children worldwide dying from hunger every single year. And you're wasting $30 trillion just in the USA alone. I mean, just with the injection of money we made, I'm not even talking about the money lost, just the money created, printed for your stimulus package so you could watch Netflix. We could have solved world hunger for 100 years. We could have paid for healthcare for the next 10 years, not only for the poor people, but the rich people as well. Unemployment is higher than ever, and that's just the beginning, because economic is a domino effect. When there's no more job and no more business, then it's not that easy for it to come back. And right now we're just like hanging on a thread thanks to stimulus and thanks to newly printed money, but we're going to have to pay for that eventually over the next decade. So you have to look at that. You have to look at the number of suicides that spiked up, domestic violence that spiked up. I mean, you're making a lot of sacrifice. So you really need to prove to me that you saved a shit ton of life for that. You cannot forget that. And so that would be my next point, and that's what we will go. So sorry to be a little bit emotional about that, but as I told you, I live in a third world country, so I know what poverty looks like. But in first world country, it's no different, because like there's been so many studies in the past decade made by the left and people who are advocating for welfare, who shows you in first world countries how poverty reduces life expectancy by a whole lot. Poverty is the greatest disease on earth, including in first world countries.
Hey man, no, I 100%, that is a real problem. I've read articles about how the COVID shutdown is affecting the world economy and the poorest and most vulnerable people. I would, share your sympathy, and I sort of.
But this kills people.
Response to say, yeah.
This kills people.
So I agree about the nature of like a world economy, and having the fate of some people tied to what's going on in like a global marketplace, because they're like growing a crop that is only valuable in that marketplace. They can't like sustain themselves, and it's a very dark thing. So I have two things to say. I guess the first is that you're presenting a false dichotomy between lockdown or the economy. I think we can see that countries that have locked down have now had an economic recovery, or are on their way to economic recovery. Countries that have not locked down have had a continuing problem. They've seen their cases spiral, and now they are in economic peril as a result of this. So if we disregard callously all human life, the most efficient thing that we can do for the economy is to have a reasonable lockdown. So that is number
I've
one.
often heard
number
that.
Two, that this.
Okay.
So let me get it on the table, but because I don't think we even really need to go down this route, because at least the way you wrote your prompt, you're saying that SARS-CoV2 is an excuse to implement this geopolitical action. So
not the virus itself,
who
just the
did
fact
that?
that
Who is doing this?
I'm not talking about the virus itself. I believe the virus to be just natural. I'm just saying the fact that they took a random new virus, which isn't much worse than the flu, and lied about it to make it seem much more deadly
who is
in order to
they?
impose lockdown.
Who is they?
But that's just, why do you want to care about the guesses that I have?
Who is they? No, who is they? Because
well, the WHO for sure, for example,
you have to
the WHO for sure. The WHO for sure. Like they are the one who started this whole thing. It's the WHO.
So
and
I
Dr.
agree
Ferguson, Dr. Ferguson is not the first time, other doctor, but all of those people, like the WHO basically. Like who was behind it, I don't care about that. Like clearly, the WHO pushed for the work lockdown. The WHO pushed and released studies which were completely false, and it was obvious it was false at the time. And set up.
I really want to play a who's on first joke. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
no, I'm not familiar with that.
We won't do that. Oh,
but I mean, I don't really care about that. All I care about. I don't know. How would I know? Like, I'm not in the Secret Service. I don't have access to those type of information. Science is something that is at my fingertip. Fucking Geo-political is just about guesses. And I'm not working in the Secret Service.
Okay, but how can you have a debate on just guesses, though, right? Because I think this is where your thing falls apart. Because like I'm willing to grant you for the sake of argument that like, okay, man, like fine. Like I won't grant it for the sake of this debate, but like to see where you're going for now in this.
I already told you.
Small,
first virus. Okay, first virus isn't very dangerous, and if we didn't do anything, we had like it would have been like any previous winter. So it's not common that we have as many deaths in the summer as in the winter, but we would have much less deaths than during most winter.
We have 3 times the deaths of the worst year.
Well, I don't agree. So
and then we also have, you know, all the deaths from the flu. So it's like these are just additional deaths. It's not like
I don't agree with
it. Imagine if there were 2 flus. Imagine if there were 2 flus, and one of those flus was 3 times as deadly as the flu.
Yeah, but I don't agree with that. I already told you I don't agree with that. But so here's the thing: if we just have like a disease which is less deadly than the flu and happened in the summer when our hospital are not at the risk of being overwhelmed, and locking down will kill many more people, and it was easy to know it at the time. And not only that, but if we look at the actual statements and the actual studies that were made at the time, they are obviously based on falsified methodologies, then we can infer that coronavirus was just a political ploy. Is that logic to you? You don't need to have guessed. You don't need to know who they are or who.
No.
So what is the issue with that methodology?
So they could simply be mistaken about how deadly coronavirus is and be making common sense, logical appeals to try to keep their political futures like intact in a self-interested sense, and then also just like trying to protect people from this virus.
That's precisely what I said. I said that if you allowed me to go through studies and to go precisely through the thing on the virus, I could prove point 1. For the lockdown, with studies as well and serious stuff, I could prove point 2 about the dangerousness of lockdowns. What I couldn't, like the weakest points of my argument would be the third one, that it is not dishonesty, that it is not incompetency, but dishonesty. And a good example for that is, for example, the fact that the WHO on their own website says that the CFR is bullshit, that the CFR in 2009 was 5%, even though the true fatality rate for people infected was 0.015%. They say all of that clear as day on their website. Yet when they talk, they are like, yeah, 3.4% of people are going to die. We need to close everything down. And then you look at the studies they used for that. They freaking used Ferguson studies. Like, he got fired this time. But he's the guy who kept making completely inflated studies his whole life. He did it about mad cow. He did it about H1N1. He did it about Corona. He did it about also a couple others. Like, if you look at what they're using, it's clearly fallacious. And those are people who, I'm not talking about politicians. Politician could be incompetency, could be personal interest. I don't really care about that. But the scientists and the WHO, those guys, I believe we can prove it was dishonesty and it wasn't just incompetency. But first, we have to agree on the fact before we can look back into did they lie or were they incompetent?
Okay, so are you aware that herd immunity only works in a certain population? Countries like Canada actually don't have a large enough population to have herd immunity.
No, but herd immunity is not a thing. Like, it would take years and years and years and years. Like, it won't happen.
Okay, I just want to just put that forward. So I guess maybe I'm not, I don't know. I just feel like, so you agree then that there is no global conspiracy, or that what is best and could be explained with ignorance should not be attributed to malice?
I don't agree with that in the case of specific interests and specific people, especially amongst the WHO and the scientists. That I cannot agree with. Like Dr. Fauci, I cannot agree with, for example. Like, Fauci is a 26th expert on infectious disease, according to Expertscape. And I've read his previous studies. Like, this dude knows what he's talking about. When this dude tells you that you can actually increase the length of a disease by locking down, like, I know he's full of shit. I know he knows that's not right. I cannot do that. Like, not Dr. Fauci. Come on, the guy is like a pillar in the infectious disease world. And in the WHO, there are many other people that are similar. When they write something on their website and say something different on TV, oh, why? Well, I have no idea. I have my own guess. My thing is that it's just because of the IMF. I think the IMF is just trying to weaken countries in order to increase its control over them. I think they want to take out the federal, the how do you say it? The federal, no, the world reserve currency privilege from the USA in order to impose the XDR instead. So I believe those people conspire to start it all. Most other people, of course, like the presidents of the different countries, obviously they're not part of the conspiracy. They just did it for personal. Like, once the WHO says there is a dangerous pandemic, you have to take decisions for your own personal interest.
Okay, a lot on the table there. I mean, I do agree that the IMF is.
I mean, that's my guess. It's really just a wild guess. I have no proof. It's really such a wild guess. I have no proof. But here's the thing: when I was in front, because it's the thing. In March, I made the calculus. In March, I saw the IFR was below 1.1%. In the time, I had a huge margin of error. I thought it was in between 0.01 and 2% because it was very early on. 0.01 and 0.2%. Excuse me. So the maximum was 0.2%, which is like basically less than the flu if you in countries where they don't have vaccines. So yeah, I saw that range, and I saw the type of spread as well, and I was like, okay, so wait a second, what's going on? And I saw that the official studies were either completely fucked up or were all based on Chinese number. And I was like, wait, guys, are you really taking the Chinese number when we have numbers from Iceland, Italy, South Korea? Like, why the fuck would you take numbers from China to know about a disease? Like, we know those people can easily fake their data, which is not the case in other countries. What is wrong is that the government has a perfect control over data, so they can cheat data if they want to. While in Italy or in other countries that I named, what happens is that every doctor is allowed to publicly release its own data, and every hospital is allowed to publicly release its own data, and anyone can call them and ask them for the data and receive them. And you can also pay the government in order to get all raw data for the nation. And then basically, if someone wants to, like, if the Ministry of Health wants to lie on the number, you can just call all the hospitals in the state and be like, hey guys, what's your number? And make sure that the nation, like the Ministry of Health, didn't lie. You can do stuff like that. And then the guy gets fired. It's very complicated to cheat the number in our countries. In China, they can just do it like that because they have full control over the data. It's illegal for a hospital to just go ahead and publicly release something without going through the CPP.
Right. I mean, they certainly do have different cultural norms.
And the proof is that those studies, but the proof is that those studies ended up precisely as I predicted, to be 100 to 50 times more than the current studies. Like in the end, I was right, and they were wrong. Was that I was more competent than them, or that they were lying? And to be honest, for someone who stayed in front of his TV, looking at them, like saying precisely the contrary to what they was written in their studies. Because here's the thing: if you look at the studies, if you look at the official report on the WHO website, they do not lie about facts. But when they talk on TV, their whole narrative is extremely dishonest.
Right. I agree that WHO does seem to be a little bit partisan, perhaps. I don't know. I mean,
I'm not from the USA.
Interviewed by them, and I would agree that maybe I don't want to speculate on the nature of WHO, but I would say that this does not indicate some kind of global conspiracy of.
I'm not talking of a global conspiracy anyway. I don't believe in global conspiracy. The thing is that once
an alternative
like,
currency,
what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Are you really look at Bolsonaro when he said, "Hey, fuck the WHO, they're lying. Fuck this virus. Let's have crowds of people."
He got coronavirus twice.
Yeah, and he's not dead because
a picture of.
But he's not dead.
A picture of Bolsonaro, dude. He had like a breathing tube up his nose, like multiple days. Like it was. I don't think you want one of those things up your nose. This is not like, dude, look like death. Like many pictures of Bolsonaro, like coughing, and he's like, Jesus. I guess
is this true?
Yeah, he had coronavirus twice, dude.
But
at least in my research, although I could be wrong because I'm wrong about a lot of things. But I don't think that you have shown. I mean,
not true that
conspiracy here that's behind all of this. I think you might have speculations, but like, can we put this in a broader picture? Like, do you believe in?
I never talked about
global warming. Can we like? We're gonna.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
But I mean, I never
just like take the word of the experts, right?
Yeah, of course, and on coronavirus as well. Like the experts today prove that I was right, and that. Like, by the way, Oxford University always said that the IFR was really low. Mr. Raoul always said the IFR was really low. Zumla in March wrote a paper about the disease being much less deadly than people thought it was. I mean, those people are amongst the best experts and the most recognized expert on infectious disease. Like they control the like multi-million dollars hospitals and research laboratory. One of them controls is the head of a P3 laboratory on infectious disease with making studies on the Black Plague. I'm not talking about some dude in his garage, right? Those are the most they are being.
When we're talking about those studies, we would definitely, have
so those people from the beginning, said this virus wasn't a big issue and that we shouldn't lock down from the very beginning. And I did too when I looked at the number.
Access to those studies. Then,
of course, and like the president in
the president in France come out.
The president in France wanted to see them.
So when COVID hit and they developed these policies of lockdown, they had access to all of these studies you're talking about?
Yeah, of course.
How? Didn't these studies come out as weren't they studying the very thing that hadn't taken place at this time they're supposed to have existed?
Well, it was already taking place in Italy, in Iceland, in South Korea, and in China.
I mean, they had some small amount of information, and all that information showed that like South Korea took it very, very seriously and dealt with it very, very well, and all those countries tried to follow the South Korean model.
Yeah, but and we had also the cruise ships, but it doesn't really matter because here's the thing: the cruise ships were thousands and thousands and thousands of people that were all tested, and it gave us information about the spread. And South Korea and Iceland, all they did was reduce the spread, but we can know the deadliness of the disease depending on comorbidity and age thanks to that. So thanks to some country, we had the information on how deadly it is, and thanks to the cruise ship, we had information on how much it spreads.
Okay, but I would put it to you
what
that
they did is that they
countries
used
that had a
more
lockdown,
numbers.
countries that had a lockdown, like South Korea, did a lot of contract tracing, like South Korea and
Well,
Germany.
they didn't have an
They
actual
did,
lockdown like
they
in
did,
other
they
countries.
did better.
Lockdown.
They did better at dealing with it than countries that didn't do these things. Countries
No,
that
I
didn't
wouldn't
do
agree
these
with
things,
that.
as we speak, there is a runaway pandemic of like growing or perhaps slightly lessening proportions. So we can't just say that these governments, what these governments did had a bad effect. What these governments did, to the extent that it saved people, was actually good, and they don't need to be motivated by a malicious force like destabilizing
in
world
the
currency.
in
We
the
don't
top
need
20 country
to
for deaths per
infer.
capita, like in the top 20 country for deaths per capita, you have amongst the worst, like you have amongst the strongest lockdowns in the world. So what do you have in the highest deaths? But wait a second, you just said something false. You just said something false. You just cherry-picked a country of South Korea, but you have to remember that France, you couldn't even go do your groceries more than twice a day. You couldn't go out without a signed paper. One of the highest deaths per capita. Spain, same thing. Highest deaths per capita. Italy, same thing. Highest deaths per capita. UK,
They
same thing.
instituted
Highest
those
deaths per capita.
policies. They instituted those policies as a direct result of their incredibly high death rate and like the fact that their facilities were getting overwhelmed. It was like a massive crisis. So they took the severest action because things were incredibly severe there. So you're putting Descartes in front of the horse.
All right, but that's what I'm saying. So you can just, like, if I cannot just say that they had lockdown, therefore they had more spread, you cannot just say they had lockdown, therefore they had less spread. It goes both ways. You cannot take the South Korea example and pick it, like, I live in Cambodia. I live in Asia. We haven't had a lockdown. We don't wear masks. We don't social distance. We don't have spread.
Yeah, but do you think if China hadn't taken those actions, it wouldn't have just like spread beyond China's borders?
Well, I think that I'm telling you that I think that 90% of the lockdown were useless anyway. There were very few lockdowns that ended up being useful, and regardless, we don't really care because it's not much more deadly than a flu in the end. So I mean, why would we even fight to prevent just a flu? Like, come on.
I mean, it's 3 times more deadly than the deadliest year of the flu.
In the USA, not
so
in
far in only half a year. So it's going to be 6 times more deadly.
Yeah, but here's the thing: here's the thing: if you look at other countries which has the same spread according to serological tests, they have very, very different deaths. It's just because of definition. You're not like, if you took the same definition as for the flu and the same methodology as for the flu, you would have much less than 180. Let's say I wanted to wait a second. Let's say that anyone who dies with a pimple counts as a pimple death. I'm gonna have millions of people dying from pimples. Am I gonna just like waste $30 trillion to remove all pimples from people? Of course not.
Yeah.
So this thing is not a pimple. This thing is a deadly disease, but it's not gonna kill. No, it didn't kill 180,000 people. I sorry, but I cannot agree with that.
So let me directly address that, because I think that's an interesting point. So I do agree that can be tricky to pinpoint the exact cause, but we have to look at the fact that COVID is unique in that it exacerbates comorbidities. So the fact that you're saying, oh, it doesn't count because he had this comorbidity. Well, COVID specifically exacerbates those comorbidities. So
how does it do so? Why are you saying that? Who says so?
Well, because it's like a weird blood disease that we like don't quite understand, but it does seem to, right? It's particularly deadly in people with comorbidity. So it's not like, oh, they had a comorbidity, oh, we like can just discount this. It's like, no, they had a comorbidity which was directly affected in a unique way by COVID, and then they died.
Yeah, but the only way to know that for sure is coroner studies, and the only one who did it was Italy, and they say that 88% of the deaths, COVID had nothing to do with it. So we already have the answer to that question.
I don't think they can say nothing.
And there is something else also. There is something else. So if you look at Australia, if you look at all the country where they don't use the same recommendation, if you look at all the states where they don't use the same recommendation, what you see is that the number of hospitalized and the number of infected compared with the number of dead is different. Like, okay, let's look at Australia, for example. Why do they have less comorbidity rate
All right,
within their death.
you're getting me on just the sheer stamina, of which
I'm sorry.
I am beginning to dwindle. So let's kind of like sum up here, so that like you can say, you can cite your studies and I can cite my studies, right? And I
But
think
it's all about methodology.
But I think it comes down to sort of the value judgment, though, that you're making, right?
Yes, the methodology.
Yes,
The value of the methodology.
Right, you're
I think
saying
that randomized PCR tests, randomized coroner studies are the strongest methodology we have. I do believe that.
So do you believe that car accidents are a big deal?
I don't really understand right now, because anyway, my claim is that lockdown will kill more people than COVID, and that the lockdown will save.
Okay.
So I mean,
do you believe that car accidents are a big deal? That we should have legislation like seatbelts to prevent against death by car accidents?
My argument is that lockdown will kill more people than it will save. So I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Okay. My point is that we have common sense regulation against car accidents, and
yeah, but they don't increase
seatbelts, right?
Yeah, but they don't increase
COVID
deaths from
is
other
the
causes.
third highest. So COVID is now the third most likely cause of death behind heart disease and cancer for the United States. So it's now above death by car accident. So it is a problem that we need to make regulation about.
You could say the same thing about influenza. Wait, you could say the same thing about influenza. Like, it was one of the leading cause of death as well. You could say the same thing about influenza.
So COVID is a higher cause of death, more likely than influenza?
Well,
it's the third most likely.
It depends on the country. In my country, it's not. In Vietnam, it's not. In Thailand, it's not. In Australia, it's not. But in the US, it's because of definitions. Like, it's obvious that the virus cannot be, like, you cannot have a country where when 10 people that are 65 years old or more without comorbidity, you will have 8 dead, and another country when 10 people get infected and they are in the same situation, you get 0 dead. It's not how it works. You cannot have a country where you have like very little hospitalization but a lot of deaths. Like, you have to give me a picture that makes sense, that is different from mine. You cannot just tell me, yeah, it's perfectly normal that the deaths are 8 times higher than they should be according to hospitalization, and that they are 30 times higher in this country than in this country, even disregarding the spread. Let's just completely disregard the spread. Because the spread, it could be influenced by lockdown, it could be influenced by mask. Let's completely disregard the spread. Let's only take into account people who go in hospital, how many of them die. Let's only take into account how many people need to show up to the hospital for population. Let's just take into account the real number of infected from serological tests, how many of them die. Out of the number of like randomized tests as well, because that's how you do poll. You take representative portion of the people randomly, and then you extrapolate the numbers. But you need the small number of people to be randomized. When you do the same thing, then you can know exactly out of the different people who got infected, how many actually die. Because that's the thing, in a country, if you only test people in hospital because you don't have enough tests for everyone, you're going to end up with extremely high case fatality rate. But that doesn't mean that it's much more deadly.
I agree that these are, unique challenges that people who do studies on COVID need to face, and
they did. And the IFR is 1.17. Like, the average of studies is 1.17.
But I think the overwhelming consensus here, right, is that we look at countries that have had a lockdown, we see their success. We look at countries that have not had a lockdown, we see them struggling. And we can see that, I would view these numbers and see that this is a problem, right? If things get like New York was before a lockdown, then that would be really bad.
New York was worse. New York was worse 2 years ago, and no one cared. And right now, we spend $30 trillion. We spend enough to pay for healthcare for the next decade, just to avoid something as bad as the flu 2 years ago.
So it's not
because
as bad.
Only the only thing. The only thing
It's
which is
3
three
times
times,
as bad.
but you don't listen to me. The only thing which is 3 times as bad is the death. Every single other number is much lower. And when you look at the infection fatality rates, you see that the deaths were inflated in New York, because we know how many infected there was in New York. We know how many hospitalized there were in New York. We know through randomized study what is the real rate
Did they or did they not build
of death.
like a thing to house the bodies in Central Park? Didn't they do that?
Oh yeah, but you know that the number of deaths increased enormously, even for people who didn't have the disease in New York. In New York, there was a great panic, and a lot of people died without coronavirus. So you look in hospitals compared with previous years, you had, I think, around how many was it? I think it was multiple hundreds of people every week, up to thousands of people every week, who, even removing everyone who tested positive, you had much more deaths than you had in any previous years. Even in hospitals, you take only deaths in hospitals of people who tested negative, and them alone amount for much more deaths than we ever had in previous years. So yeah, you had a lot of deaths in New York, but like it wasn't due to COVID. They were tested negative, and even
it
only
was
the
due to
people tested
COVID.
negative. Well,
So
the people tested negative
the
alone.
deaths in COVID in New York were due to COVID. You cannot say they weren't. They were.
No,
okay.
I'm talking to you about the amount of deaths who tested negative.
Something?
Wait a second. I'm talking about the people who died testing negative alone. Just the people who died testing negative alone accounted for much more deaths than in previous years. Only the people who got tested and tested negative. I mean, that's something, right? So those deaths didn't come from COVID because they were tested and they tested negative. And we account for much more deaths than in previous years. And it's not just that. It's also that if you look at, wait a second, it's not just that. If you look at everything, you could see also that
those deaths existed because of the strain, probably, that was put up on those hospitals because of COVID, right? And that people didn't want to go to the hospital because of COVID, etc. Okay, but we've been going for 2 hours now. I propose I will concede to you that I should look more into exactly how deadly COVID is. Maybe it's less deadly than I thought it was. Okay, but can you concede to me that there is no global conspiracy pushing this narrative, or at least you can't prove in any way, and you won't try to prove that there is like this conspiracy?
So first of all, I don't even guess that there is a worldwide conspiracy. I really believe that everyone just does what's best for its personal interest. I just believe there is a conspiracy from precisely the WHO and the IMF, no one else. Maybe a couple other people they have influence upon, but that's it, nothing else.
Okay. Do you have any?
By the way, I have no proof for that, and I have no proof of that, and this is why I didn't say this is why in the in the thing.
So will you concede that you can't prove it, and so you concede that you concede the debate?
If we can prove that they knew COVID wasn't deadly, yet pushed for a world lockdown.
Okay, but you can't.
I believe we can fairly say. I believe I can prove that.
But you can't prove that. Okay, so will you concede will you concede the debate?
Well, how can I concede the debate? Because I believe we can. I cannot prove.
You tell me you can't prove it. So I think we should either to go to a vote, or you can concede because you can't prove what you set out to prove.
I don't understand.
I do really appreciate the discussion, though.
But as I already told you, I don't need to prove who conspired and why they conspired and how they conspired, or if there was conspiracy at all, to prove that the people who there was no need for a lockdown and the people who pushed for it knew it. And that I can prove. That's what I can prove. But that's enough to support the claim I made. I was very precise when I made the claim. I didn't say those. So that's enough to prove. Just proving that there is no need for a lockdown. That a lockdown is gonna kill more people, and that the people who pushed for a lockdown, so mainly the WHO, knew that at the time. That's enough for me to actually sustain my claim. So no, I do not have any proof that that the IMF did whatever. I do not have. I do not even believe in any worldwide conspiracy. That would be crazy. Obviously, not like, like for so many reasons. You cannot have a conspiracy with 100,000 people over all countries. But like obviously, the USA isn't conspiring with China and Russia all together. Like that doesn't make sense. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that lockdown kill more people than the virus would without lockdown. The virus is less deadly than the flu, and they knew it at the time. At least the WHO knew it at the time. Not the politician. Obviously, politicians don't know shit about science, but like the WHO, they knew it. Like that's what I wanted to prove during this discussion. That's the point I wanted to go over. I believe that's enough and sufficient to actually win the claim.
Cool. Yeah. Are you happy with everything? Do you want to add? Do you have a closing statement or anything?
I'm not happy at all. I feel like, I'm not really happy at all. But I think we've been going at it for long enough. So yeah, as a closing statement, I would just say that we need to always be careful about methodology, and when studies which have a very strong methodology, such as first of all, it has to be randomized, and especially when it's about coroner studies, we need to look at those and we need to give them their importance. And we cannot just stand with a claim that just doesn't hold up in every country. Like we cannot say, yeah, in this country it was extremely deadly and in this country it wasn't very deadly. We can say the spread is different, but we cannot say that people who actually got infected, they died at extremely different rates, especially when hospitals weren't overloaded. And we can check which hospitals actually didn't have room for new patients or not. And the media often lies to you if you look at the actual number on the Ministry of Health. So I would just said on saying that please always look at studies and official numbers. Please stop listening to politicians and media. That's all.
Great. Well, thank you so much for debating. Yeah, I appreciate your point of view for sure. And I think we can agree that, you should always read a study. You should always.
I wished I could link more study, but if there is anything if there is anything, because I know I made a lot of claims that I didn't back up, but I have all the links. So if anyone wants any link, any source, just ask.
Sure. Yeah, I know it's very hard in like a verbal debate where you're going back and forth to like properly have like a tab and study, etc. All right. So what do I have to say here? We can see that lockdowns work at reducing the number of new cases. You can see that governments who impose common sense regulation and countries that have done so have experienced a faster economic recovery and are, in some sense, the duality or the dichotomy between locking down and protecting the economy. This is a false dichotomy, that countries that lock down have a faster economic recovery. Countries that don't lock down, have trouble controlling the spread, have a continuing and lasting problem on their hands. I think we don't need to look to an international cabal of global conspirators. We don't need to look to the IMF. We don't need to even look to who may be, politically, these are all political organizations. They all get their funding from somewhere. But we don't need to infer a malevolent conspiracy to replace the US dollar as the central currency. And I would put to you the sort of questionability of doing a bunch of napkin math, with all due respect, and sort of questioning the legitimacy and like the actions of these, the experts, the quote unquote experts. I think there are other situations where we find a lot of mistrust of experts in general. And I would just recognize that this is sort of in the zeitgeist right now. This is what's happening. There's a mistrust of institutions. There's a questioning of these things, and questioning these things is probably okay. But we don't want to lead our questioning or our mistrust put us into, a situation where we fail to see what's in front of us. We don't want to be a flat earther who has to deny all evidence that the Earth is round. You don't want to be a global warming denier who has to make like a possible Mott and Bailey argument. And similarly, we should not infer global conspiracy. We should not think that there is a shadowy cabal in control. I think in times like this, it's very frightening to know that, our institutions actually might not be in control. We actually might be facing the unknown. We might be grappling towards something we don't understand fully. And this loss of control that we feel, I think there's a psychological mechanism where we project like a paranoid fantasy so that someone, even if they're an evil cabal, is in control of the situation, because that is a less frightening reality.
So we both agree.
I would leave you with this, that, the world is just, no one is in control. There's not a
we both
shadowy
agree.
cabal behind these things. Okay. So
Like we both said, listen to the experts and the expert consensus, and please don't believe in crazy conspiracy. So I guess we both agree on that. We had the same conclusion.
Cool. Well, I'm glad we came around again at the end. So hopefully we.
I guess we just disagree on the current consensus of experts, and and as I told you, like you kind of forced the crazy guess out of my mouth, but I was the one claiming it was just crazy guess and useless, and wasn't really like whatever. It was just a guess.
Yeah, I feel you. Well, I appreciate the discussion. Thank you for the audience for your incredible endurance at this this marathon. So, if you're voting, just give yourself a pat on the back for